Okay, so you've definitely heard about the Epstein Files, right? It's this huge story of power, secrecy, and this massive global demand for justice. But what if I told you that the very same issues at the heart of that case have a direct and frankly pretty surprising link to a secret file that could exist about you at your job right here in Australia? Yeah, let's dig into that.
It seems like a huge stretch, I know. A massive U.S. criminal case on one hand and your day-to-day job on the other. But the link, the thing that ties it all together, is one absolutely crucial word: transparency. And as we're about to see, what we all demand from the justice system is often the exact opposite of what the law allows inside our own workplaces.
So what kicked this whole conversation off again was the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Over in the U.S., the government literally passed a law to force open documents that had been sealed for years. Now, this wasn't just some legal formality. It was a direct response to this enormous public outcry for openness, a demand to hold powerful people and institutions to account.
And that demand for transparency is really our starting point. It's this fundamental call to shine a light into the darkest corners, and it's a principle that, as we'll see, goes way beyond just one single criminal case.
So when we talk about this kind of transparency, what does it actually look like? Well, we're talking about pretty much everything. Witness statements, travel logs, visitor lists, data pulled from phones and computers, victim testimony, private emails and messages, the whole shebang. The goal was to lay it all bare, to understand the entire network and the systems that let these terrible things happen for so long. This is the new gold standard for accountability being set on the world stage.
All right, now let's pull this idea all the way back home, right into the Australian workplace, because this is where that connection starts to get really, really interesting and a little bit unsettling.
This quote just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. A workplace is like its own little world. It has its own power structures, its own vulnerabilities, its own issues of privacy. The exact same dynamics of power and secrecy that you see in these huge public scandals, they're playing out in offices and work sites across the country every single day.
And this is where you see this just wild contrast. On one side, you've got what we, as a society, demand from our justice system: total transparency, no more sealed records, and real accountability for the powerful. But then you look at Australian workplaces, and the legal reality, it's kind of the complete opposite. Secrecy isn't just common, it's often legally protected. Your employer can withhold documents that are about you from you. And that control of information, well, it just locks in those power imbalances even tighter.
So that brings us to the big question. What's actually in your employee file? And what are you even allowed to see? Let's break down the rules as they stand right here in Australia.
Okay, so under the Fair Work Act, you do have some rights. You can access your basic employment records, stuff like the hours you've worked, your salary, your leave balance, your tax and super records, and the basic terms of your employment. Seems pretty standard, right? It gives you a baseline of information.
But here's the catch, and it is a big one. What about the stuff that really matters when things go wrong? Like the investigation report that led to you getting a formal warning, or the witness statements from a bullying complaint you were involved in. What about the internal emails your boss sent right before making a decision about your future, or the full doctor's report from that fitness for work assessment? In most situations, your employer has absolutely no legal duty to show you any of it.
So why? How is this even possible? Well, it all comes down to a really critical legal loophole. It's called the Employee Records Exemption, and it's part of our Privacy Act. What it does, essentially, is remove your employee records from most of the usual privacy rules. This gives your employer huge power over how your personal and professional information is handled, used, and shared.
And don't think this is some old, forgotten law that doesn't get used. It was tested and confirmed just this year, in 2024. The Fair Work Commission, in a case called Arizon versus Webb, made it crystal clear. Employers are not legally required to give you a copy of an investigation report, even if that report is entirely about you and is being used to decide your future at the company.
So what's the big deal? What's the real cost of all this secrecy? Why does not being able to see these files actually matter so much in the real world?
Well, the impact is huge. First off, it completely denies you what's called procedural fairness. I mean, how can you possibly defend yourself against accusations or evidence that you're not even allowed to see? It lets the employer control the entire story, which just digs that power imbalance in deeper. It makes fighting an unfair dismissal claim incredibly difficult, and it means the real reasons behind life-changing medical decisions can be kept completely in the dark.
When you put it all together, what you get is this secret file culture.
And that culture creates the perfect breeding ground for misconduct to go completely unchallenged. When people know there's no real threat of exposure, things like abuse, harassment, and discrimination, they're free to fester in the shadows, just like they did in the Epstein case.
Look, it all sounds pretty grim, I know, but there is a very clear way forward. So let's take a look at how the system could actually be reformed to drag our workplace rights into the 21st century.
Workplace advocates have laid out 4 really concrete steps. Number 1, get rid of that employee records exemption loophole in the Privacy Act. It's time. 2, legislate proper, legally binding standards for how all internal investigations have to be conducted. 3, make it mandatory for employees to get full access to any medical report that's being used to make decisions about their job. And 4, beef up our unfair dismissal laws to force employers to hand over the documents they use to make their decision.
If we took these steps, it would be a game changer. It would fundamentally alter workplace culture in Australia, moving us all toward a future that's actually built on a foundation of transparency.
And this is exactly why it matters so much. This quote really gets to the core of it. Transparency isn't just some nice-to-have, fluffy ideal. It is the absolute cornerstone of justice, of accountability, and of basic human dignity, especially in places like a workplace, where there's a natural power imbalance right from the start.
So if there's one core lesson to take away from the Epstein case and apply to our own working lives, it's this, and it's so simple. Secrecy is the soil that abuse grows in. Transparency, on the other hand, is one of the most powerful preventative tools we have. Just the idea that things might come to light is often enough to stop misconduct before it even starts.
And that really leaves us all with one final question to think about. If we agree that transparency is the cornerstone of justice, it's probably worth asking, what is my workplace built on? Is it built on openness and fairness, or is it built on secrecy?